the legend continues. I'm gonna do things a little different today. Normally my videos take a few hundred hours to produce. I figured I'd give myself like 10. I really want to do a quick sketch study of Mr. Miyagi. I just want to sculpt some clay, talk some see how it goes. Let's get into it.
When you feel life out of focus, always return to the basic of life.
We're praying.
Breathing.
Alright, here's a quick look at the armature. These are some pipe clamps clamped around a piece of wood which is secured to the board with these L brackets. And this is just the rough height of the bust up to the start of the neck. This is aluminum armature wire, just bent into shape and tied together. Now, the top is open on the inside, so I filled it with packing paper and masking tape to hold it all in. These little wings are to hold part of the shoulders, and I'm not quite sure where I want to crop this one, but this will be enough if I want to build off of it more and make it wider. Here's a quick view of the side. You can see how it's bent forward a little, which follows the shape of the neck and spine. So this is a 25-pound block of wet clay. This is how it comes when you buy it. What's great is that you can just unwrap it and go. You don't have to heat it or mix it or whatever. And I use my little wire clay slicer just to slice off big hunks and then start building things up. I try to do this quickly so I can get back to watching anime and harassing people at Costco. So building things up carefully makes it easier later on. And just like our AI artist friends will tell you, easier is always better. Don't mind the fact that this looks like a we all started out that way, especially the one true god, Jeff Bezos. Now, at this stage, I'm just trying to bulk things out and I'm not thinking about any kind of likeness. Once I get everything closer to the final size I want it to be, I'll block in some features. I'm gonna try and capture a moment from the movie where Miyagi's trying to catch a fly with his chopsticks. I feel like that's a pretty iconic moment and what most people think of when they picture Miyagi. They actually made that into a mini game in the Karate Kid Nintendo game that came out way back in 1987. I read that when they were filming that scene, they tied a live fly to a fishing line, but it didn't work, so they just used some camera cuts. I think Mr. Miyagi was the main reason most of us liked Karate Kid, and I'm interested to see where things go in the next season of Cobra Kai. I also think Cobra Kai's done a great job continuing the series, and I'm hoping for another spin-off. Just keep this little out of it. Although I'd pay to see him take a slap from his dad. Now, this is roughly the size I want it to be, and I've used up the first full brick of clay, so on to the next. I think I used a little more than 1.5 of these 25-pound bricks on the whole project. That's a really common question I get when people are starting out, like, how much clay do you need for the project? Of course, it depends on what you're making and how big you want to make it, but this should give you a good idea of how much you can get out of a brick and a half. With wet clay, it's always best to have more than you need because this stuff does dry out, so you don't want to let it hang out for too long. If you wrap it up well, it should last long enough to order more though, so don't panic too much if you do. Alright, now here I'm just going to put some rough indicators of where the facial features go, and this is just a very rough estimate. I didn't measure anything here, I'm just eyeballing it. I can shift things into place as I go, but in these early stages, it's important not to be too precious with the thing. You can't be afraid to make adjustments, just get the puzzle pieces laid down and then start moving them into place. The longer you do this, the better you'll get at estimating, and that's where speed comes from. Or just quit before you disappoint your whole family.
Why?
I don't know. Miyagi wouldn't have quit. Daniel probably wouldn't have quit. He was kind of a little though, so I can't say for sure. So although I didn't measure anything, I do have the center line drawn down the face, and it goes around the back too. That will help keep things symmetrical. That's something you want to keep track of early because it can really mess you up later. It's a lot easier to keep things symmetrical with smaller pieces, but with larger ones like this, where you can't really see everything all at once just by holding it in front of you, it can be a little tougher. I know it's really hard to visualize this thing being anything but a giant turd at this point, but just trust me. It's going to look real stupid for a minute, and this is mostly because I'm impatient, and instead of building things up slowly and carefully, like an academic type, I just want to get clay on here so I can bully it into place. But basically, there's a couple of reasons it looks so weird. For one thing, there's no bone structure, and for another, the eyelids are very heavy with no actual eyeballs present. The thing is, Miyagi has really thick eyelids, and his eyes almost bug out of his head. They're really big and round, especially the top lid. So you have to get enough clay on there to work with. Now I'm just going to make a bunch of small adjustments to get things a little closer, but I'm still going to keep everything really loose, and I'm going to keep it pretty loose through to the end of the sculpt anyway because this is just a quick study. Next up, I'm putting the ears on. I try to always do these at the same time and bring them up together, like Biggie did for Puff. Except in this situation, it's okay to touch. Ears seem complicated, but if you look at them enough, you're still going to suck at sculpting them, and I mean, the only thing I can tell you is keep at it, champ. They don't have to match perfectly, but they should be at least the same size and shape, and pay attention when lining them up. Look at the sculpt from all the angles and measure it if you have to. Also, don't be afraid to slice them off and just brute force them into place. Now that we have the final size of the skull, we can put his iconic headband on. And actually, in Japanese, it's called a... It wasn't even supposed to be in the movie, but Pat Morita happened to have a handkerchief on him and just ad-libbed tying it around Ralph Macchio's head. Most people thought it was supposed to be a sun, but it's actually a flower. I'm sure there were a few of them made, but last time I looked, I think one of the screen used ones sold for like $20K. I found a picture of one too. This would have blew my mind as a kid. I had one that I used to wear all the time during my adventures in the ghetto of Central Falls, Rhode Island. It was officially licensed, but the colors were wrong. Mine had a black pattern, but I didn't find out until years later when I was watching Karate Kid on Blu-ray that the headband's actually navy blue. Anyway, before I put the ties on this headband, I'm just gonna lay down the collar of his shirt. And nothing fancy here, just following the neckline and flattening it out. And I'm gonna make the ends a little thicker so they don't dry out too fast. Then some real quick and dirty wrinkles. I don't want to get too involved with these because wrinkles can eat up a lot of time, so these are just real loose, like your Now onto his tank top. Same thing here, just fast and loose. I'm laying down the neckline, and then I'm using my wire-wrapped sculpting tool to create some quick ribbing in the shirt. And next we'll add the hair, and for this I'm just paying attention to the main form, so I'll bulk it out, and then I just quickly add some strands and direction with my fingernails. In karate, this is called slapping the dragon. In sculpture, it's called being lazy. I'm just going to push things a little further with a couple of different tools, mainly just a wooden spatula and my wire loop. I'm also going to pay attention to the hair coming from underneath the headband and carve it a bit away just so it looks like the headband is actually on top of the hair and not just growing out of it, because that'd be weird. Miyagi doesn't have much hair up top, so I'm just scraping in a few strands with my fingernails again just to give some indication of hair there. And at this point, the clay is starting to dry out a little bit, so I give a little spray with water to stop that. Now, the way this headband is tied in the back seemed weird to me since there's no knot, but I just followed what I saw in the movie, basically this pic here. Wet clay is much like a millennial in that it's not really self-supporting and any pieces that hang off are prone to drooping, so I'm going to put a big chunk of clay underneath the headband tie to help hold it up. We'll call this the parental chunk. The other tie is attached at a couple of spots, so even though it's vertical, it's still supported just enough. If you wanted to mold this, you'd have two choices. Basically graft the piece on so that there aren't any hollow undercuts, or make the pieces removable in order to mold separately. I think I could get away with molding this all in one piece, but I didn't want to put that much thought into the piece, and I don't plan on molding it, so I'm just going to continue on. Now, I'll add the rest of the hair, starting with the eyebrows. I just put a little bit of clay on since Miyagi doesn't have really bushy brows. Then I use my spatula to drag in some lines in the direction the eyebrows grow. He does, however, have some pretty thick sideburns, so I'm just going to add some clay on, again in the direction that the hair grows. You got to pay attention to that because it's not just random. And the last bit of hair is his mustache and Flavor Saver goatee. I add this on similar to how the eyebrows are, just a little thicker. Now the portrait's just about done, but I want to include his hand with some chopsticks, so here's the armature for that. There's a bunch of different ways to do this, and you can be better and more precise, but this is all the armature wire I had left, so I had to piece it together, and the wire is just twisted, bent, and wrapped. I'll show you a few angles of it, and if you can't figure it out by yourself by looking at it, then you're better off just watching the rest with your mouth open, because we both know you're not even going to try anyway. So I'm just going to eyeball where I think the hand will go, and then mount that to the base. And with that roughly positioned, it's time to put some clay on and build it up as you would with an armature. Yeah, now we're sculpting business. If you've never sculpted a hand before, trying to sculpt one convincingly holding a pair of chopsticks is a great way to disappoint yourself. I did take a few pictures of my own hands holding chopsticks for reference because it's a weird position for hands to be in. And I'm not being too strict about this either, but you just have to try and get the planes right. Then sculpt in the fingernails. One thing to note is that I didn't add any clay on for these, I just carved them in. Basically make the lines and then scrape them in following the curve of the finger. It's pretty self-explanatory, but luckily it's one of the things AI can't seem to grasp the concept of. All right, we're almost there. Now I'm going to, I've got some disposable chopsticks. I'm just going to paint these real quick and then place them in the hand. I am not sculpting no chopsticks. Now, if you sculpted the hand right, which you didn't, you should be able to just poke these in and move on. Good enough. Now I'll take the same loop I made the ribbing on the tank top with, and I'm going to go over the shirt to clean things up a bit. And I'm going to leave some of this cool texture behind. just to make things a little more dynamic and interesting to look at. And I want to blend some of it in with my finger just to kind of take the harshness away and soften things up a bit. Here I'm adding a quick eyelid crease to finish off the eyes. And then I'm going to paint the details on the headband. And for this, I scribed in some light guidelines just so I didn't have to do this over a bunch of times. It'll be visible in the end, but I don't care, so you shouldn't either. Then I just went ham putting all these dots on. And this could have all been done a lot cleaner too, but since I'm not sure if the algorithm will determine this is worthy of showing you, I'm going to call it good. Miyagi had really dark eyebrows, so I'm going to slap some paint on to give a little contrast to those two.
Whole life have a balance. Everything be better. Hey, go find the balance.
Man, this thing's loud as
Daniel-san!
Sorry if you can hear this thing buzzing. So I know this is a little different than usual. This actually happened over the course of 3 days. I'd say about, 12 to 15 hours between sculpting and filming and setup and all that. So I overshot my goal by a little bit, but I was actually having fun, and I didn't have a deadline for the first time in a while. So, but we'll see how the edit goes. So this is just something I wanted to do between projects to get some more content out for you guys. The cinematic stuff is awesome, but it's just impossible for me to keep up and post often. And I want to cut that out because I like being here. So hopefully you like this. Leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Now, what do I do with this thing?